Irene here, and in this video, we're going to be taking a tour through the Revit user interface. We're going to get familiar with how to get started with Revit, how to choose a template that better fits our needs, where to find templates, and then where things are distributed within the Revit user interface. So let's get to it. All right, so when you first open Revit, this is what you're going to be met with. This is Revit's homepage, and the first thing that you're going to notice is that when it comes to recent files, Revit divides them into two categories, models and families. For the time being, all you really need to know is that you're going to be working with models. This is the Revit format that contains interior, architectural, engineering, basically any kind of project. Families, they're a whole different thing that we're going to be tackling in future videos. So for the time being, you just need to know that you're always going to be working with models. You can also see on the left side that when it comes to open or new, it is once again divided between models and families, and you're going to be choosing models once again. Another thing that I want to point out is here on the bottom left, you have a few additional options. Recent files is the default format when you first open Revit. And basically what's going to happen is that as you start working with projects, they're going to start showing up here as your recent files. If you have never done anything in Revit, what you're going to see here is a few sample projects that Revit makes available for you. So you can see there's an architectural project, a structural, electrical, HVAC, and plumbing. The most important part of this section, in my opinion, is Autodesk Docs. Now, this is a very interesting feature that Revit offers, which basically allows users to store their files in a cloud-based system, similar to what you would have with a Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, and whatnot. But also, if you're working with Autodesk Docs, you may end up working with BIM 360, which is the collaborative tool that was developed within Revit, and it's one of its main selling features, which basically allows users to work in real time with the same project across multiple consultants. So this is a very interesting and important part of Revit, which we are going to be tackling in the future. But for the time being, we're going to be going back to recent files. And because we're going to be starting a new one, we're going to go models, new. And the first thing that you're going to have to do before you can actually get into Revit is going to be choosing a new project template. Now, templates in Revit are extremely important. They basically determine what assets are loaded on the file when you get started. And what assets are loaded is going to be based on industry. So basically, there's going to be a template for architecture, for structural design, for plumbing, for HVAC, for electrical, and so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that you're choosing the right template. Templates are also divided between metric and imperial. And one very important thing to keep in mind is that if you choose the wrong template and you later want to change your mind, there's no easy way to do so. You basically either have to butcher your way into the things that you need, or you have to start from scratch. So choosing the right template is very, very important. Now, when it comes to the templates, what most people are going to do is click here, and this drop menu is going to show you all the different template options. And again, there's going to be architectural, structural, plumbing, blah, blah, blah. But you may notice that mine doesn't have that. Mine has none. Now, these can happen sometimes depending on how Revit is installed on your machine. But if this happens to you, don't panic. The templates are still probably there. It's just that Revit is not automatically loading them. So the solution for this is that you're going to go on Browse. And once you're in your browser, you're going to go to My Computer. And then you're going to go to See. And then you're going to go to Program Data. Now, if you do not see Program Data on your browser, what you're going to then do is come down here to your search bar, and you're going to search for hidden. Just type in hidden is going to give you what you want, which is this, show hidden files in the system settings. You're going to click here, and then if you scroll down, you're going to find change settings to show hidden and system files. This should be checked on. If it's checked off, what you're going to do is click show settings, and that's going to open this little window here. And all you have to do is check this here, show hidden files, folders, and drivers. Once you do that, you're going to click apply, you're going to click OK, you're going to close this guy, and now you're going to be able to see your files. So you're going to go onto Program Data, then Autodesk, and then you're going to search for RVT, whatever version your Revit is. So in my case, I'm working with Revit 2025, so it's RVT 2025. If you have 2023, it's 2023, and so on and so forth. this is a good moment to point out that despite the fact that these videos are being done using Revit 2025, you can use any other version of Revit 2024, 23, 22, 20, I think up to 2020. There's not a huge difference. Revit is one of those programs that makes changes incremental. So over the years, you're not going to notice a huge difference. Maybe a new feature here, maybe a new feature there. So instructions in general tend to remain consistent. So we're going to go into Revit 2025, and then here we're going to search for our templates, and there we go. Now, you can see that I have basically three options. I have one folder called English, one folder called English Imperial, and then I have a bunch of additional templates. These different templates are in other languages, and the format is metric. You can tell that because of the M. You just want to work with English, and then it's going to be a matter of, do you want to work with English metric or do you want to work with English Imperial? So if I go here, you can see that all of them say metric. If I go one folder up and I go here, all of these are in Imperial. I'm going to be working with Imperial for these exercises, but again, choose whichever one you prefer. Now, once we are in here, you can now see the templates based on the field, so to speak. So we have commercial, construction, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, precast, residential, structure, and systems. My recommendation for the purposes of interior design is just to go with default. You don't need the default multidiscipline. That's a little bit hardcore. Just go with the default. It's easy. It has all of the basics, and then we can customize it to our specific needs. So I'm going to choose default here, open. And now before I click OK, I do want to point out that you have this option here, create new project or project template. Very, very, very important. Leave it at project. You do not need to switch it to project template. Project template is basically going to create a different format file. Revit projects, the format is RVT. Templates are RTE. If you choose project template, it's gonna look like it's a regular Revit project, but it's not going to be. And then later down the road, you're going to figure out that there's certain things that you cannot do, and then you're going to get upset. Now, there's a way to fix this, but I will discuss that in a future video. For the time being, it's already in project. Just don't change it. So we're going to go with a default template. We're going to go with a project, and we're going to click OK. All right, and here we are in our Revit project. So before I move on with explaining the user interface, I just want to clarify what is it that is different between working with different templates. So there's a bunch of little changes that you can get from one template to another, but I'm going to simplify it to three main aspects. One is the units, two is the assets that are preloaded, and three are the views that are preset. Now, again, all of these things can be changed, but it can be a little bit cumbersome. So the first one is the units. Because I chose an Imperial template, what's going to happen is that, for example, if I decide that I want to draw a wall, you're going to see that my measurements are in Imperial. But also, because I chose Imperial as my template, you're going to see that my wall value, the description of the wall thickness, is also in Imperial. So keep that in the back of your head. So that is thing number one, the unit system. Number two is the kind of assets or the variety of assets that are preloaded. So going back to the example of walls, if I expand here to see the different wall types that are preloaded for this template, you can see that there's like a pretty decent selection of walls, okay? So that's thing number two, the kind of assets that are loaded in your project. And thing number three is going to be the views. So for my views, and again, we're going to talk about what views are and all of this, don't worry, but Revit projects come with certain views preset. So for a default template, you can see that the views are separated into floor plans, ceiling plans, and elevations, and you have 2 levels plus a site plan, and then you have north, south, east, west. So this is my default template. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my home page and I'm going to choose now a different template. So this is another cool feature about Revit. You can have as many projects open as you want. So if you want to open another project or start a new project, what you're going to do is you're going to go on the top left corner right next to the R. You're going to find this button here. This is your home page button. Quick key Control D, and you're going to click on it and we're back at the starting page. Now this does not mean that we have lost our previous project. We can always go back to it by pressing this arrow, but it just means that we're back in the home page and we can start something else. So I'm going to go back to new model again, and this time what I'm going to do, just to show you the variety, I'm going to choose a plumbing template. And you know what, let's make it spicier. I'm going to go to metric and I'm going to choose a plumbing metric template. So I'm going to go open and I'm going to go OK. And here is my second project. So this is my default template project. This is my plumbing metric project. And what you're going to see is that the units, assets, and views are now going to be different. So if I go back to drawing my wall, you're going to see that now my wall is being measured in millimeters. But more importantly, the wall itself, here on the left side, you can see that the wall is also being described in millimeters. And because we have to work with precision, you know that like 6 inches and 150 millimeters are not the same thing. So what unit you work with really matters. But that's not it. So units is one thing. If I go here now to see the variety of walls that I'm getting, it's a much shorter list, because think about it, a plumber doesn't really care that much about walls. The walls are already there and he's just putting the plumbing. So I'm getting a smaller selection of assets when it comes to walls. And then finally, if we go to the views, you can see that now the views are under the category of plumbing, which may have a different set of settings than default views. So this is why it's so important to make sure that you choose the right template, because can I fix all of these things? Yes, you can change the unit system of your project. You can load assets from a different project or from other places to replace the ones that are in the incorrect unit system, or you can rewrite them and edit them. And you can edit the way that your views are organized and the number and type of views that you have. So all of these are fixable issues, but fixing all of these issues is a pain in the ass, so you don't want to go through it. So very important to make sure that you're choosing the correct template, okay? So I'm going to close this guy here. I'm not going to say. And now we are back to our Imperial default template. Now, I'm not sure if I mentioned this on my previous video about choosing Revit, or basically an introduction to Revit, but one very important thing to keep in mind is that, unfortunately, Revit is a Windows-based software only. If you have a Mac, you cannot have Revit unless you get a like split hard disk or something like that. So just wanted to make sure that I point that out. When I work with programs that are multi-platform, I try to point out the differences between like, oh, this is how it works in Mac, this is how it works in Windows. We're not going to have that problem here because it's a Windows only program. Okay, so now we can get started with taking a quick look at our user interface and getting familiar with what things do we have and where they are. So first thing first, we have the quick access toolbar. This is a pretty common feature in most softwares nowadays. It's basically the greatest hit commands. You can find it on the top left corner. It's this line of commands here. And basically it has those commands that like, you know, you're gonna need constantly. So we have things like open, save, undo, redo, print. But then you're also gonna see that there's a few commands that are very Revit specific. So we have a bunch of them that are about taking measurements. We have some for tagging, for adding text, some that are specific to creating views, whether it's 3D views or sections. And then one very important one is this guy here. I'm going to leave my cursor there highlighted for a second. This is Thin Lines Quickie TL. If you work with AutoCAD, you know this guy. So what this is going to do is basically allow you to turn on and off the thickness of lines. Revit is first and foremost a construction documentation software, which basically means that the rules of AutoCAD apply to Revit. And in AutoCAD, line thickness is very important because it indicates when things are structural, when things are detailed, and so on and so forth. So basically what thin lines is going to allow you to do is turn on and off whether you see that actual thickness, because the thing is that when you're working on a drawing, having that line thickness can sometimes be a little bit cumbersome and annoying. So for me personally, I like to leave this guy on while I'm working in a project, and I will only turn it off if for whatever reason I want to check how thick my lines are in reference to one another. Okay, you can also click on this button and add more or remove things from these like quickie command options. So keep that in mind. And then moving along, we have the application title bar, which is this guy over here on the top middle. Now, the main thing about this guy is that it's going to give you 3 important pieces of information. Number 1, it's going to tell you which version of Revit you are working with. You can see that I'm working with 2025.1. Number 2, it's going to tell you what project you're working with. Because again, remember, you can have multiple projects open at the same time. So this guy is going to highlight whatever your current project is. And then finally, it's going to show you what view you're currently in. So it carries a lot of information. Then on the right side, we have the info center, which is this guy here. It has a help button, which has never helped anyone, but it's there for liability purposes. So I'm just going to ignore it. Google whenever you have issues. The one thing that is very important is your Autodesk account. when you're working with Revit, you always want to make sure that you are signed in to your Autodesk account. In fact, if you're not signed in, or for whatever reason you cannot connect to the internet for an extended period of time, Revit will actually give you a warning that will say like, hey, if you don't connect to the internet, I'm just going to shut down this entire operation. Because Revit has so many features that are connected to the cloud or other Autodesk services, Revit requires basically an almost constant connection, and it also needs to check and validate what products you have access to. So very, very important whenever you're working with Revit, just make sure that you are signed into your Autodesk account. And then moving along, we're going to go to the File tab, which is this little guy over here, highlighted in blue. And if I click on it, you are going to see a menu that is pretty common with most software. We have new, open, save, save as, export, print, close. Nothing crazy, nothing new. There's a few things that I want to take a moment to mention here. Number one is the fact that when you're working with Revit, there's actually a bunch of different Revit formats that you can work with. So if you go to new here, you're going to see that there's actually a bunch of different new things that you can create. And again, the two that are the most common and important, so to speak, are project and families. And they have different formats. Again, what format you're working with is very important in Revit. Projects are RVT, families are RFA. Okay. The other thing that I want to point out is that when it comes to opening, there's also a bunch of different formats that Revit allows you to open. So things like cloud models, IFCs, you can open those directly in Revit, which is pretty cool. You also have save, save as. When you go to save as, you can actually save something as a cloud model. So these would send it to those Autodesk Docs cloud-based storage system, or you can save it as a project or as a template. So once again, make sure that you're always saving as a project. This is also a good moment for me to mention a very bad news. Sorry. Revit is not a retroactive software. So this basically means that whatever version of Revit you're working with, you cannot open versions that are newer than that. So for example, if you're working in a team and you have Revit 2023, and your partner has Revit 2025, your partner can open your file, you cannot open their file. And the real problem here, because we also have that in other programs like AutoCAD or SketchUp where you cannot open the newer versions, but the problem with Revit is that you cannot save down. So I cannot take my Revit 2025 project and say, oh, I'm just gonna save it to Revit 2023. So this is super important. If you're working in a team, you need to communicate and you need to make sure that every member of the team is working with exactly the same year of Revit. Version is not necessarily that big of a deal. For example, you can see that I have Revit 2025.1. The point something doesn't really matter. What matters is the year. So very, very important. And then finally, I just want to point out the options here. This is another common feature with most softwares, and it basically allows you to customize the program to fit your specific needs. There's a few things that I do want to highlight here. First is going to be under general notifications. So you're going to see that you have this thing here telling you that you can set up how often you get save reminders. So this is another thing that is interesting, let's say, about Revit. There is no autosave in Revit. If your computer crashes and you have not saved, you're going to lose everything. And like, I hope you feel in my pain that this has happened to me way too many times. So what Revit offers you instead is the possibility to set up reminders to save. So that is what this guy here is. I think the default is every 30 minutes. I like to have it to 50 minutes because if my computer crashes and I lose 30 minutes worth of project, I'm going to be very upset. So 15 is a good compromise. And then I just save every time that the message pops up. The other thing that I want to point out is the user interface. From the user interface, I want to highlight keyboard shortcuts and the fact that you can customize them. So this is something very important to keep in mind. Same as AutoCAD, SketchUp, Photoshop, most programs nowadays have quick keys to access commands. Revit is not the exception. And same as with those other programs, learning and consistently using quick keys is the best way to become proficient with the software. Revit gives you cheat sheets. So basically, whenever you highlight a command, it's going to show you if it has a quick key and what that quick key is. But what I do want to point out here is that you're going to notice that not all of the commands that you would assume should have a quick key do. So feel free to customize your Revit to make sure that it has all of the quick keys that you need. So for example, if I go to the floor command, let's say that I want to draw a floor, you're going to see that there is a quick key for a structural floor, but there's no quick key for an architectural floor, which to me is crazy. But that's because I only draw architectural floors. So it would make sense for me to come here and say, okay, I want to add a quick key. That being said, keep in mind, Revit is a big boy of a program with a lot of commands. So it's very likely that whatever your first guess of a quick key for a command is going to be taken. So for example, let's say that I want to assign FL to the floor because, it makes sense. So if I type my quick key and I click here, assign, it's going to tell me that the command is currently being used by another command. So you have the option of replacing the quick key for floor instead of currently it's flip rebar. That would make sense to me, but that's because I work in interior design. Or you could click cancel and you could choose any other arrangement of words. You can go all the way to typing like the full word if you want to, but then if you have to type the entire word, then you're probably losing on the optimization. I'm not going to be doing any customization of commands just because I want to keep these videos as close as possible to the experience of vanilla Revit, let's say. But again, once you get more familiar with what commands you use constantly and you get more comfortable, you can come back here and start assigning quick keys. Then the other thing that I want to point out is under colors. So here you can change your screen type, and there's basically two ways that you can do it. So one is you can just change the entire user interface. So let's say, for example, that I want to go from light to dark. If I click here, okay, it's just going to change everything to dark. If you're an AutoCAD user, you may really want to work with this because it's the same kind of like dark blue screen that you know and love from AutoCAD. But if not, you can actually assign a color scheme to the user interface and then a different color scheme to the drawing space itself. So if I go here to File and Options, back to Colors, you're going to see that I have my user interface, but then I have the canvas, so like the drawing area. So I could, for example, say that I want the drawing area to be light, so that way I can see like my black lines as black. So again, you have a lot of customization. Once again, I will leave it in light because I know when most people install Revit, that's the experience that they're going to get, and I'm trying to match that as much as possible. The other thing that I do want to also highlight is going to be graphics and hardware. Revit is a pretty demanding software on your computer. So if you don't have the most powerful computer in the world, you may notice that your computer starts chugging along when you're doing certain things. So you can come to graphics and hardware and kind of like play with the settings here to just set up things so your computer isn't struggling that much. So for example, you could uncheck allow navigation during redraw, which is just going to kind of like reduce the amount of work that your computer has to do. Or for example, you could go on hardware and you could uncheck hardware acceleration, draw visible elements only. So again, unless you're having problems, you don't really need to mess up with this. But if you are having problems, it is good to know where to go. And there are other settings, which we will cover in the future as we learn more things about Revit. But again, in general, this is quite technical, and I find that Revit is well set up enough that I very rarely need to come into my options, but it is good to know that you have them. So we're going to click OK, and now we're going to move on to our ribbon and tools. Now, if you are an AutoCAD user, you are familiar with the ribbon system. So basically the way that it works is that you have these little tabs that basically have different categories, and then within those categories you're going to find all the different commands that you need. Now in Revit, you will notice that these tabs are based on the different professional fields, because this is a very important thing to understand. Revit is BIM, Building Information Model. So when you're drawing, you are not drawing geometry and then assigning a meaning. The geometry already has a meaning and you're just placing it in the project. So because of this, when you are creating, it's like, okay, are you creating an architectural element? Are you creating a structural element? Are you creating an MEP element? And so on and so forth. So under architecture, you're going to find build, so walls, doors, windows, columns, floor, ceilings, yada yada, circulation, so stairs, ramps, railing. You have a few model elements, you have rooms and areas, openings for those geometries, datum, and work planes. Then you're going to notice that there are 3 tabs dedicated to structural engineering. We have the structure one, which is kind of like the basics of engineering. So we have columns, beams, foundations, trusses, that kind of stuff. And then they have an entire tab dedicated to steel and an entire tab dedicated to precast. And that's how you know who Autodesk favorite child is. Then we have the Systems tab. Systems is going to contain MEP. MEP stands for Mechanical, Electrical, and Plumbing. So here is where you're going to go when you need to draw ductwork, plumbing, electrical trays or electrical cables, lighting elements, switches, outlets, and whatnot. Insert is the tab that will contain the options to bring into Revit any format that isn't Revit. So you're going to see that you can bring into Revit CAD drawings, IFCs, topography drawings, point clouds, images, PDFs. Revit is really, really good at allowing you to work with other formats, which is something that I really appreciate. Annotate is similar to the Annotate tab from AutoCAD, except that in Revit, there's a lot more annotations that you can do. Analyze is where things get interesting, because the thing is that due to the fact that Revit is a BIM software, geometry is data-driven. This basically means that you're not just putting a wall and it's like, oh, it's like a nice little rectangle. This wall is going to have properties. It's going to have thermal properties, and it's going to have structural properties, and it's going to have material properties. And basically under Analyze, you can analyze those properties. So for example, you can do structural analyses, you can do MEP analysis. So for example, you can check if you have like a plumbing system, you can see if there's going to be any leaks in your system. You can also do energy efficiency analysis, solar and lighting analysis. All of this is fantastic for a sustainability project. So one of the benefits of working with Revit is that your model isn't just drawings and pretty pictures. There's information that you can actually use to make decisions. So pretty cool. Massing and Site is the fun tab. This is where you're gonna go when you want to do things that you're like, I don't know if I can do that with Revit. Turns out that you can. It's just a mask. Collaborate is another interesting one. As I mentioned earlier, collaboration is a very important part of what Revit sells you. So basically the way that it works is that when you are collaborating a Revit project with other consultants, all of you can actually work in the same project at the same time. It's not the same as a Google Doc where you can see the other person cursor moving around your screen, but it's pretty close, and that makes collaboration much easier. In future videos, we're going to start discussing like how we set up BIM 360 and how we save and how we manage a project when we're collaborating with other people, but this is a fantastic feature. We have View. View is going to allow us to create and manage any and all types of views that can be created within Revit. And this is another interesting area because it really highlights all of the things that you can do with Revit. In my previous video, I kind of mentioned the fact that like to me, Revit is like you have AutoCAD and SketchUp together, but it's even more than that because first and foremost, Revit is a construction documentation software. So under the views, you're going to see that you can create sections, you can create callouts, plans, elevations, and so on and so forth, like our typical construction documentation. But we can also create renderings. So like pretty pictures. In fact, Revit in the latest versions, I can't remember if 2023 has it, but 2024 for sure has it. They are now collaborating with Twinmotion, so you can create your model and just take it to Twinmotion and make it like mind-blowing. So you have these like aesthetic use of the software and these like very construction documentation use of the software. You can also create just raw data. So you can create legends, you can create schedules. So again, there's a lot that you can make within Revit. Then we have the Manage tab. The Manage tab is what I like to call the dumpster tab because this is where all of the commands that are a little bit too weird to fit anywhere else go. So for example, on the Manage tab, you're going to be able to manage your materials, but also your project parameters, project units, project information, project location, and then for some reason parametric design is here, but we're going to ignore that for the time being. Add-ins is another interesting one. Revit, same as SketchUp, is a program that relies a lot on extensions, add-ins, plugins, however you want to call them, to provide those additional features that may be very specific to certain industries. So they have an entire tab dedicated to just like, this is where the extensions go in. And we're going to talk a little bit about different extensions and which ones are better for interior design or which ones are the most popular for interior design. But I do want to highlight that all extensions don't go to the add-ins tab. You can see that I have Enscape, which is an extension, and it basically has its own separate little tab. So extension, they don't always go to the add-in tab, but the add-in tab will contain only extensions. Hope that makes sense. Then we have Modify. So if you work with AutoCAD, you're quite familiar with this guy. And in fact, you're going to see some of the greatest hits of commands. We have Move, Copy, Rotate, Offset, Mirror, Align, Array, and so on and so forth. But then you're also going to see that there are some other commands that are kind of very specific to Revit. Things like Split Face or Notch. And we're going to talk about some of these as we start working. One important thing to highlight is that this Modify tab will change based on whatever commands you currently have. So what you're seeing now is vanilla modify. Like if you're not doing anything, these are the modification options that you get. And then to finish out with the ribbons, I do want to highlight this because this little button here is going to allow you to expand or minimize your ribbon itself. So if I click on it once, see, now my ribbon has been reduced to a single symbolic icon, and then I can see the other ones. If I click on it again, then it's going to change to be basically like a drop-down menu. And if I click on again, it's going to disappear altogether. And the reason that I want to highlight this is because the amount of times that I had people come to me in a panic being like, oh my God, I don't know what I did. My ribbons are gone. What do I do? Don't worry. All you need to do is be brave and press these buttons one more time, and then it's back. In fact, if you click on this little arrow here, you're going to see that you can actually just choose whichever option you prefer. But it is good to know that you have customization options. The next thing that I want to mention are the properties, which also contain the type selector. The type selector is not going to make a lot of sense right now. It's going to make a lot more sense when we get to the next video where I explain how things work in Revit. But basically, this is a drop-down menu that allows you to select from a variety of assets. What really matters here is the properties themselves. So, as I already mentioned, Revit is a very data-driven program, and because of that, every single thing has a lot of properties. So you're going to see that if you don't have anything selected, you're still going to see properties. You're going to see the properties of the view that you're currently in. But for example, if I draw a wall, see, this is the save reminder. Now, obviously, I haven't drawn anything, so if my computer crashes, I haven't really lost anything. But as soon as you see that guy, you save your project. So I'm going to click here. No. And if I draw a wall, let's say this is my wall, you're going to see that this wall, when I select it, has a bunch of properties. And again, all of these properties are going to be really, really important, not just to extract data, but to actually modify and change things about your geometry. So properties are super important. Underneath the properties, we have the project browser, which I like to refer to as the project directory. And in fact, I personally consider it so important that what I like to do is click and drag it out. So basically what this is going to do is going to give me a full side of my screen for my properties. And then what I like to do is dock my project browser here on the right side. Because basically the project browser is basically an encyclopedia of your project. It's going to contain all of the information about what is currently contained within your project. So for example, you're going to see that it's going to show me all of the views. It's going to show me if I have legends, if I have schedules, if I have sheets. But even more important, it has a full list of all the families in your project. And if you don't know what families are, don't panic. We're going to get there eventually, but you can think about them as AutoCAD blocks or SketchUp components. Okay, so Project Browser is going to allow you to navigate through your project and find the information that you need. With that out of the way, on the middle, we have our drawing space, which is going to be defined by these tabs. So these tabs are going to tell you what view you are on, because Revit is interesting in the sense that it's neither a 2D drawing program like AutoCAD, nor is it a 3D modeling like SketchUp. It's both at the same time. So basically the way that it works is that when you are creating geometry in Revit, the geometry is 3D. Whatever exists as a 3D object. And then what's going to happen is that depending on the kind of view that you choose, the object is going to be represented as a 2D object or a 3D object. So floor plans, elevations, basically every construction view is a 2D view. And then you can create like perspectives, walkthroughs, and whatnot. So you can see that right now I have level 1. And if I hold there for a second, it's going to tell me that it's a floor plan view. And you can also know what view it is because it's going to be highlighted in black. But if I go here and say, okay, now I want to see level 2. Click, and that's going to open my view 2, my level 2 view. So you can see that now I have 2 tabs, one for level 1, one for level 2. Both of them are still floor plans. Whoever is my current view will be highlighted in black. So if I switch to level 1, see, this guy's in black. But if I go, for example, and I double click on level 1 ceiling, you're going to see that the symbol that precedes the level is different. So this is very nice because it can help you very quickly identify like what is it that you're looking at. Are you looking at a floor plan? Are you looking at a ceiling plan? Are you looking at an elevation? So all of these are like nice little clues that help you figure out where you're at. Now, let's say that I'm done and I don't want to have all of these tabs here. Well, if I want to get rid of all of them except the current tab, instead of me having to go click, 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 what you can do is come all the way here to the top to close inactive views and click. And that's going to get rid of all inactive views. And Another cool thing about Revit is that you can have a split screen. This is a feature for AutoCAD, 3ds Max. I think that most Autodesk software have this feature. So for example, I can have my level 1 view open, and then I also can have a south view open. And in order to split my screen, all I need to do is click and drag my view and then move it to an edge. See, this blue highlight is going to tell me what space the view will occupy. So see, now I have 2 views, and you can have as many views as you want. You can have 3, 4, whatever makes you happy. Now, keep in mind that you can see how this guy is not available. So that is because every new split is going to be considered its own screen. So I'm only going to be able to use this guy if within this screen I go on and I have multiple views. Okay, so you can have a lot of information. This is why Revit users usually have a dual screen. Now, when you are on your drawing space, you're going to see that you're going to have this little guy here, which gives you a few view and navigation options. So if I click here, that's going to give me this guy, and this is going to allow me to pan and zoom. Now, I don't really like this guy, to be entirely honest with you, especially for the 2D view. It feels a little bit kind of silly. If you're working on a 3D view, it can become a little bit more handy. So to open a 3D view in Revit, the quickest way is go all the way here to the top where the little house is and click. And that's going to open a 3D view. And when you have that 3D view, you can see that now we have the cube. I think you also get this cube if you're working with AutoCAD 3D and 3ds Max. So I can, for example, say I want to go to the south view, or I want to go to this corner, or you can just click and drag the cube, and that's going to allow you to orbit. Otherwise, orbit is going to be accessed by pressing your mouse wheel and holding shift, and then you can orbit. Pan is going to be just pressing the wheel, and then zoom in, zoom out is going to be moving your wheel backward and forward. But what I really like is that if I click here, you can see that now you have a bunch more options. So you have orbit, zoom, rewind, pan, look, up, down, like you have more options here, even more if you expand here, but we're not going to go that hard for a very long time, don't worry. While we are at the drawing space, I also want to mention the context menu. Basically what it means is that when you are on your drawing space, when you right click, depending on where you're right clicking, you're going to get different results. So if I right click on empty space, I'm going to get a set of properties. But for example, let's say I'm going to draw a wall here. If I draw a wall and then I select that wall and right click on it, I'm going to get a different set of options. So contextual menu, we know it, we love it. Then on the bottom right, we have our selection tools or toggles. So basically these guys are going to give you additional options for selection. There's 2 main things that I really like from this section. Number 1 is the fact that when you make a big selection, and in Revit selection works the same as in AutoCAD in the sense that you can only select one thing at a time. So if you want to add to the selection, you can either hold Control to add multiple elements, hold Shift to subtract from that selection, or you can do selection box. From left to right, you have to fully cover the object for it to be selected. From right to left, you only have to partially touch the object for it to become selected. But what I really like is that when I make my selection, if I go here to the bottom right, you're going to see that this filter here is telling me how many objects I have selected. I have 3. And if I click on it, which is what I just did, it's actually going to give me a list of all the different things that I have selected. So I could, for example, come here and say, I don't want to select the levels. So I'm going to say, not the levels. So I'm going to go apply, and that is going to unselect all of the other things that I didn't want it, and it's going to let me keep just the thing that I wanted. So that is thing number 1 that I really like about the selection toggle. The other one is this guy over here, select elements by face. So by default, the way that Revit works is that in order to select something, you have to hover over the lines that make that geometry. So you can see that my cursor is over the wall and nothing is happening. It is not until I move my cursor to the edge of the wall that now I can see that I can select that wall. But if I come here and I check this guy on, you're going to see that as soon as I put my cursor over the wall face, now I can select it. This is my preferred method for working with Revit, but again, choices. It's nice to have choices. Then moving along here on the bottom left corner, we have our view controls. So this is basically going to allow us to change the way that we view things in Revit. So for example, you can change your scale, which it's not really going to matter right now, but at some point, the scale is going to be very, very important. You can change the level of detail. This is a very interesting one because basically what happens is that geometry in Revit can be quite complex. So what's going to happen is that depending on what is it that you're drawing, you may want to see more or less detail. So let's say that, for example, I'm going to change this wall to a wall that has a lot more detail. So I'm going to pick this guy here. And now you can see like, wow, it has a lot of detail here, but not so much here. I'm going to go to my level 1 and look what's going to happen. Right now, if we go to our level of detail, we are on coarse. Coarse is the lowest level of detail, and it basically means that it shows everything very simple. If I go to medium, now I can actually see the layers of my wall. And if I go to fine, depending on the geometry, I would be able to see even more detail. So for example, when you're doing doors, you're not going to be able to see door handles unless you're on fine level of detail, and the door has to have handles. So for interior design, my recommendation is to always work with fine level of detail. So you go here and you set it up to fine. You also have the view style. So same as when you work with something like, for example, SketchUp, visibility settings, here you can basically change the way that your geometry shows. So for example, if I choose wireframe, then basically I don't see faces. I just see the lines that make geometry. If I switch, hidden line is the default that we start with. So that means that you see faces, but they are all solid white, basically. I could switch to shaded, or I could switch to textures, or I could switch to realistic. And this is a great moment for me to point out the fact that like Revit styles look gross, but that is mostly because of the materials. Don't worry, we're gonna make them look great eventually. So for the time being, I'm just gonna leave it hidden line. You can also turn shadows on and off. You're gonna notice that there's a sun and then there's shadows. Those two are very closely connected, but we're gonna discuss them in the future when we get to renderings. You can also create renderings in Revit, like photorealistic renderings that can be accessed through here. You can also change your crop region and whether you view the crop or not. So these two buttons work together. So first of all, you have to show your crop region. So see, every view has a crop region. And if I come here and I say, well, let's actually drag this guy here. See, anything that is beyond the crop region is not visible because I have my cropping. If I come here and I click this, this is going to deactivate my cropping region. So I can say, well, I don't want to see the cropping region, but I do want to see the effect of the cropping region. Or you can say, I don't want to see the effect. So again, lots of customization. You also have the option for temporarily hiding or isolating geometry. So this is basically going to allow you to take an object and instead of having to go right click and hide and blah, 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 you can just come here and say, well, I just want to hide it or isolate it temporarily. Hide it is going to hide the object. Isolate is going to hide everything else but the object. You also have the option to show hidden information. So let's say that, for example, I decided to hide this wall here. So if I want to bring it back, what I can do is come here and click on this little ball. And now I can see all of the things that are currently hidden in my project. I can select my wall and I can say that I want to unhide it. And then when I'm done, I can click here and now it's back to normal. You have a few more settings that don't really apply to us, such as temporary view properties, analytical model, and reveal constraints. Those are not really going to make any sense for the time being. And then to finish off, we have the status bar, which I lovingly refer to as the cheat sheet bar. So this is basically going to give you tips and clues as to what is going on and what you should be doing next. So for example, right now I'm not doing anything. The default standby mode of Revit is selection. So if I'm not doing anything, I am selecting. So because of that, if you look at the cheat sheet bar, you're going to see that it's telling me the different ways that I can select. So I can click to select, or I can go tab, or I can use Control or Shift. But if I'm, for example, drawing a wall, so I'm going to go to make my wall. Again, I'm not saving because there's nothing to save. If I go to create a wall, you're going to see that now my cheat sheet has changed and it's telling me, okay, you need to click to enter the wall starting point. So, okay, fine. I'm going to click here. And now it's once again changing and it's telling me, okay, so you can draw your wall. So for example, see, I can draw it horizontal. I can draw it vertical. I can go and enter a wall endpoint or space flip the orientation of the wall. So again, the cheat sheet bar, aka the status bar, is always going to give you tips based on whatever is going on. This is also a very good moment to highlight the modify tab. So you can see that now my modify tab, number one, it changed color. It's now green. And number two, it no longer says just modify, it says modify place wall. So this is very important to understand. Depending on what you're working with, depending on what you're creating, your modification options will change. And it's not just the ribbon. You're actually, depending on the command, may get an additional entire set of options, which is this section here, which is called the options bar. And once again, it will vary depending on what is it that you're drawing. So see, these are the options that I have if I'm drawing a wall. But if, for example, I want to draw, I don't know, a floor, you're going to see that I'm going to get a different set of modification options, okay? So it's reactive to whatever command you're working with, and some have more options than others. But with that, we have reached the end of this video. As you can see, Revit is a big program with a lot of options, but don't panic, you're not gonna need all of them immediately. In fact, you're not gonna need all of them ever. Like, no professional needs all of the options that Revit has to offer. But basically what's going to happen is that as we work together in a project, we're going to start implementing those tools one by one in a way that makes sense. So I hope you find this video helpful. If you did, by all means, give it a like, subscribe, that would be nice. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. But otherwise, thank you very much for joining in. Thank you very much for sticking through, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!